And now, welcome to the second chapter of our book. In the first chapter, we explored how our psychological issues have been magnified and the impact this has had on our mental health. Now, we will take a closer look at the systematic mechanisms behind this magnification. Why have psychological issues been labeled as illnesses for so long? How did this perception take shape? And how can we normalize our psychology instead of oversensitizing to it? In this chapter, we will seek answers to these questions and embark on a journey to humanize our psychology once again. As we challenge the illness narrative that's been imposed on us, we'll rediscover psychology as a natural part of being human. If psychologies become important, psychiatrists and psychologists will also become important. If psychologies become important, people will feel the need to seek more clinical help. If something is labeled a psychological disorder/illness, the need for clinical help increases. Therefore, the sector has been systematically encouraging us for years to care about our mental states and never neglect them. The main reason behind the insistence on the mental illness lie is precisely this. Notice that, despite fighting this battle alone for years, no one wants to give up this lie. They all know very well that they benefit from it. Every expert who calls these issues an illness or remains silent while this label is being used is a fraud. Come on, let them take me to court. I have been inviting this for years, and I am still patiently waiting for this blessed day. If psychology grows in our eyes, it will also grow in our soul. Although this may seem like a simple sentence, it hides a truth so great that it can rewrite the entire history of psychology, based on 25 years of accumulation. The sector constantly emphasizes prevalence, epidemiology, etiology, chronic, major, disorder, illness, symptom, syndrome, progression, don't neglect it, etc., and in doing so, it magnifies our psychological states in our eyes. As a result, almost all of us exaggerate both our psychology and therapy. In short, they have pathologized and abnormalized our psychology. What we need is to humanize and normalize our psychology as much as possible, because problems are treated with the opposite of their causes. Almost all psychology books are based on the principle of caring for our psychology. This work, on the other hand, is based on the idea of not caring for our psychology. I say it again and again, I will leave no unresolved panic attacks, OCD, anxiety, depression, or so-called issues at home. Just as some diseases like measles, dysentery, and typhoid ended with certain vaccines, with this mindset vaccine, many problems will also come to an end. You're Not Sick started this work, and this book will finish it. I truly believe in this. As mentioned above, by constantly associating syndromes, symptoms, disorders, illnesses, etc., with medical conditions, we have become overly sensitive to our psychology without needing any analysis or tests. The common feature of those who face problems is their heightened sensitivity. The more sensitivity there is, the more affected they are. Thus, our resistance and tolerance to even the most humane processes have been reduced, and our emotional fragility has been increased. In fact, when tolerance decreases, fragility automatically increases. In medicine, a symptom is not considered a sign of an illness unless it leads to one. In our field, the appearance of a symptom is often enough to be considered a disease, even the illness itself. This deliberate distortion, as I have tried to express earlier, has made our souls excessively sensitive to even the most humane psychological processes. A symptom, simply because it appears, is considered a sign of illness, or even the illness itself. So how could the brain not become sensitive to that symptom? If every tail is seen as a snake, how could the brain not react as if it has seen a cobra at every tail? The reason for this is that very few of the psychologies we experience are a result of the nature of the emotions and thoughts involved. Most are products of the exaggerated and intentional programming of the industry. The increase in problems over the past 20 to 30 years is another proof of this observation. As the industry has grown, the programming has increased. The emphasis on disorders, syndromes, symptoms, and diseases has become so widespread that we now mistake even the most natural changes in our psychology for psychological disorders. In this process, unfortunately, we have all become guards over our brains and souls. We go to bed with our psychology and wake up with our psychology. We've reached a point where we consider everything that disrupts our emotional comfort to be a psychological problem. We no longer want to experience even a psychology for 2 days. And with every problem, we try to solve it and get rid of it. However, the most effective solution is not to eliminate it, but to become desensitized to it. Desensitization is only possible by living as though it doesn't exist. For living as though it doesn't exist makes it disappear. But when we see a psychology as a disturbance, breakdown, or even illness, how can we remain indifferent and insensitive to it? How can one remain indifferent when perceiving a snake as a venomous one? Here, the lie of illness, which the industry declared from the very beginning, emerges again, preventing us from accessing the most effective method of desensitization through living as though it doesn't exist. That's why techniques like exposure and confrontation don't work. Because how can a brain face something it believes to be a pathological condition, i.e., a danger? For this, our brain must first be convinced that the situation at hand is not an illness, i.e., a danger. But this does not align with the interests of the industry. Yes, we cannot desensitize because we cannot live as though it doesn't exist. We cannot live as though it doesn't exist because the industry doesn't allow it. I repeat, if a person has been convinced that the psychology they experience is a problem, disorder, or illness, and that it will progress into something chronic unless eliminated, how can they live as though it doesn't exist? Without understanding the industry, learning its traps, using the correct concepts, receiving the right suggestions, and creating the right programming, we will not be able to diminish our psychology in our eyes. Without diminishing our psychology in our eyes, we will not be able to diminish it in our souls either. If we continue to view our psychology as abnormal, we will keep dwelling on it excessively. If we focus on our psychology, it will focus on us. Naturally, we won't be able to live as though it doesn't exist. Therefore, we will never witness the magical transformative power of living as though it doesn't exist. We will never witness the difference between a psychology that has been correctly perceived and lived and a psychology that has never emerged, a difference as distinct as between apple vinegar and grape vinegar. This book was written to break the cycle. Now, it's your turn to be the new living witness. Uncertainty, by its nature, creates anxiety. For example, a troubled marriage is uncertainty. We even call the most human response to uncertainty anxiety disorder. We undergo years of therapy and take box after box of medication. Separation is uncertainty and, by its nature, creates anxiety. They even call it separation anxiety and assign a pathological connotation to it. Labeling the anxiety response of the organism to separation as a disorder is like calling the body's shivering response to cold weather an epileptic seizure. A doctor wouldn't call the stomach's pain response to spoiled food a disease, but psychologists and psychiatrists label the brain's anxiety, fear, and distress responses to distorted perception as mood disorders. On the other hand, cognitive contradictions inherently create anxiety. The organism's most human response to these cognitive contradictions, anxiety, is labeled as anxiety disorder just because it appeared out of nowhere and affected us. They give us session after session. However, what truly disturbs us is not the anxiety itself, but the faulty perception of anxiety. In short, it is not the existence of anxiety, but the anxiety about anxiety. The first is a fact, the second is a perception. The first is natural, the second is learned. The first is a result of our nature, the second is the product of the industry. Every cause inevitably produces a result. If there is a cause, there will be a result. It should be that way. What is abnormal is not the existence of the result, but its absence. A hot pepper is spicy. It's unrealistic to expect the pepper to be spicy, but not give a spicy taste to the palate. By repeatedly labeling things like separation anxiety, postpartum depression, etc., and creating the coding that the result is abnormal even if there is a cause, they've made us forget this simple principle. For this reason, we want there to be a cause, but not a result. Neurology doesn't call the body's shivering response to cold an epileptic seizure, but this industry labels the organism's most natural anxiety/fear/distress response to separation, uncertainty, or cognitive contradictions as a problem, disorder, or disease. Of course, we did not arrive at this tragic and dramatic point out of nowhere. First, they distorted the concepts, and through them, they distorted our perceptions. Healthy communication cannot be established with distorted concepts. They also disrupted the communication we established with our psychology through these distorted concepts. Distorted communication creates conflict. We must build healthier relationships with our brains, souls, emotions, and thoughts through healthier concepts. Otherwise, the mental and emotional conflict with ourselves will never end. The pathologies that give birth to our psychologies are not the real cause. It is our incorrect programming and the faulty concepts we use. That is, our unhealthy communication language. In short, they have medicalized even the most human processes. Thus, they have made people more open to medication and therapy. It was our distorted perceptions, but we thought our psychology was the problem. What was distorted was not our psychology, but our psychiatry. However, we couldn't understand this. They say a hero rises where they fall. We, too, will rise from where we fell, of course. First, we will correct the concepts and, through them, the perceptions. We will see that it is not the phenomenon that is distorted, but the perception. We will deal with perception, not the phenomenon. We will aim at the right place and shoot for the right target. We will learn all the devious tricks and games of the industry one by one and take our own precautions. We will no longer view changes in our psychology as distortions in our psychology. We will remember this. Emotions do not become ill. Emotions simply change. And I'm Izzet. In this video, I've shared an important part of Chapter 2 from my book, discussing how our psychological perceptions, concepts, and communication language have been distorted, and how these distortions affect our psychologies. We explored how we need to reshape our concepts, perceptions, and communication to establish healthier relationships with our own psychology. In this journey, we learned how to protect ourselves from the industry's traps and how to break free from distorted perceptions. Remember, emotions do not get sick, they only change. In the next video, we will delve even deeper into these topics. See you in the next video. Take care of yourself.